2019.
Everybody hear me okay?
We went down.
Can you hear me at the back of the room? All right. Welcome, everybody.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I don't have a mic, but my name is Katie. I'm with Grenville CFDC, just south of here, and it's my great pleasure to be introducing our speaker for this session. So this is Andrew Button. Andrew is with Mashup Lab. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background, and I'm also going to let you in on a secret, which is that his bio is a lot longer than what I'm going to read to you, and this is all really interesting. So I'm going to give you the abridged version, and I hope that through his talk we'll learn a little bit more about his background. So after a 15-year career working in rural Atlantic Canada with the various businesses and economic development organizations, Andrew founded Mashup Lab. And that is a more than, or I'm gonna get this right, for more than profit company focused on one thing: unleashing the entrepreneurial potential of rural places. So in just the past 36 months, Mashup Lab has successfully scaled its Dream Business program to rural regions throughout Canada and the US, working with more than 320 aspiring entrepreneurs in 150 different rural communities to start and grow 200 businesses. That's all, I mean, right? Yeah, that's amazing. I don't have a microphone, sir. I'm sorry, they didn't turn it on. Oh, yes, I will. Okay. So for the translation, so hang on, let me finish the bio. One more thing I want you to know about Andrew. Andrew is from a small rural community, naturally, in Newfoundland, married a girl from a small rural community in Nova Scotia, where they now call home with their 2 boys. Okay, so that's enough about Andrew.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
So a little word about the translation. We do have simultaneous translation in the room. The sets are back there. If you're using a set, just make sure to leave it in the room here, okay? You'll pick up another one in the next room. The other thing I'd like to remind you is there is an evaluation. The organizers really, really value your feedback. So please take the time in the app to do an evaluation of our session today. Okay, so I will hand it over to Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for showing up. You guys having some fun? Yeah, me too. Me too. So 10 years ago, if you had come to my town and said, Andrew, there is untapped entrepreneurial talent hidden in your community, I probably would have ran you out of town. Right? Because I took it as a point of pride to know everybody, I thought, that was working on business ideas and working on something new in our community. I invested a lot of time and energy digging around. And I'm here standing in front of you today, 10 years later, to tell you, like, I didn't know everybody that was working on those ideas. And what I'm hoping to share with you over the next 90 minutes or so that we're together is some of the insights and learnings that we've been gaining from the work that we've been doing as we've been scaling our virtual business incubator program across rural communities in Canada and the US. And hopefully through our conversation together today, you'll go home maybe thinking differently about a few things, maybe gaining some of those insights that, you know, I learned some of those hard lessons for us all. I'll share some of those, and perhaps, you know, going home asking some better questions. So there's 3 things I want to do to kind of get the conversation started. I'm going to share some background and context so you get a sense of where this learning and insight came from. I'm going to share with you sort of the top 10 things that I feel might be useful and helpful things that I learned, again, that I wish I'd known in my economic development days. And then what I'm really hoping for is for us to get into a conversation about any or all of that things that you guys want to dive into. So you guys are going to actually dictate how the story ends here today. So my goal is to take about half of our time to give you some of that background context, get you thinking about some things, write down some questions, that sort of thing, and then we'll open it up and see where the conversation goes from there. Sound like a plan? Sound like a little bit of fun? All right. So if it didn't sound like fun, here's a hook. We're going to be giving away $50,000 in free programming for those that stick around to the end. All right. So if you're like, this is not my cup of tea, but hey, maybe we can get some awesome programming to bring back to our community. Stay in the room till we'll tell you how to access that. So as you'll begin to learn, like I am unapologetically a rural guy. I don't have to apologize for that in rooms like this, but like we mentioned, I grew up in a rural place. I spent my entire career helping people in rural places figure out how to turn their dreams into businesses. And I spent most of my childhood in places like this. So who here is from Newfoundland? All right, we got some Newfies in the room. Great. So does anybody recognize this picture? Yeah. What's that? This grandfather, yeah. So this is, I think it's in Dover, but the house that's floating down the harbor there, that's actually from a little island off the coast of Newfoundland that my dad was born on called Silver Fox Island. And we would spend all of our summers there and spend a lot of time there. And I would go and hang out with the fishermen that lived on the island that fished from there. And what I can tell you is most of those fishermen very rarely had much more than a grade 5 education. Few of them knew how to read and write, but not many. But they were some of the most innovative, entrepreneurial, resourceful, innovative people that I have ever met. And their wives were even more so, right? So this was an early education. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was an early education of like most of our entrepreneurial and innovative talent is sometimes overlooked and underappreciated. And so that's where, this idea for Mashup Lab was founded in, was this notion that there's untapped potential that we're just missing. So because of places like this that taught me that lesson. So what led me to start Mashup Lab? So like we mentioned, I spent 15 years in economic development, and anybody that's spent any time doing this kind of work in a rural place can appreciate that you very quickly get spread a mile wide and can only go an inch deep on a lot of things. And while I was super proud of the work that we were doing and felt like we were making progress, what I began to notice was that there was a massive pool of untapped entrepreneurial talent sitting in my community, not plugging into this ecosystem that we had built, right? And I just got obsessively curious about this and got more and more frustrated, like this guy, that I couldn't just go an inch wide and a mile deep trying to figure out and solve that problem. Because I felt like if we could do that and we could figure out how to get those people off the sidelines and into the game, it could have a massive impact, not only in my own community, but communities sort of North America. So this was sort of the big aha moment for me as I went through that. So again, this is just some context to share what we're going to share, right? So for those many years, we thought that, or we're told that this is kind of a representation of the entrepreneurial journey, right? So has anybody ever seen this graphic before? Nobody's seen this?
Something like a success once you had a straight line.
Yeah.
Or climb on Mount Everest.
Exactly. I've been trying to find out who originally came up with this. Because I want to give them credit because I think it's brilliant. No, I can't take credit for this. But any entrepreneur will tell you that this is a pretty accurate representation of what the entrepreneurial journey looks like, right? And I can share from my own experience that there's all kinds of twists and turns and stops and starts and peaks and valleys, and it's all over the place. But the big aha moment for me was I realized that there was a part of this picture that was completely missing, right? And it was this piece right here, right? This squiggly, messy, all over the place part of the entrepreneurial journey that entrepreneurs go through before they even step onto the bike and start pedaling for the first time. And what we're realizing way back when, and even more so now, is that the pool of people that are sitting in that squiggly spot of the entrepreneurial journey is actually exponentially bigger than the entrepreneurs that are plugging into our ecosystem that we're able to put a face and a name to, right? And in my economic development days, and this is held true for many rural regions that we work in. So this isn't necessarily unique to Nova Scotia. It happens everywhere. But most of the attention, resources, focus, programs, supports, all that stuff is designed around that part of the entrepreneurial journey. And what we're realizing is that there's a huge gap in the kinds of things that we do in that part of the entrepreneurial journey that get people, again, off the sidelines and into the game. Because if you can do that, if you can figure out how to get their attention and build up their courage and confidence to take those first few steps, a whole world of resources open up, right? Which you guys would know all about. So that's where Mashup Lab was born. It was the identifying that problem. It's that I just want to go and do that, solve that part of economic development, and see how we can make an impact there. So we were trained to think that that was step one. In fact, it's actually step 4 in my mind. And I'm happy to dig into more of this if you guys are curious and interested in why I think that. I won't spend our time there today. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. So real quick overview of Mashup Lab and what we do. So there's really sort of 3 areas of our activity. We run what we call activation events, mostly online. I own several co-working spaces in rural Nova Scotia. And what I want to spend most of my time on today, because the thing that's actually having the biggest impact of all of that is our virtual business incubator. But I'll overview the other 2 really quick. And if you want me to dive into any of that in our conversation afterwards, I'm happy to do that. So activation events, this is just one of them. So this is a organization that I sort of helped found in my community called the Awesome Foundation. There's actually chapters all over the world. I heard about it from a couple of friends of mine in Calgary, actually. And we give away $1,000 cash, no strings attached, every month to people that want to go do awesome stuff in our community. So, you know, completely community-backed, micro-funding, zero government money into any of this. We've now given out over $80,000 in $1,000 chunks to all sorts of ideas. It's not just business ideas, but like things for community gardens and like fun, whimsical, silly stuff. Like I think we gave $1,000 to a guy to make a Twitter bubble machine, so you tweet at it and shoots bubbles at the side. It's just like fun stuff like that. But we're also realizing that a significant percentage of the ideas that show up for Awesome translate into dozens of new businesses in our community in lots of serendipitous ways. So it's a little bit of a kickstart, if you will, like activating those that are sitting on the sidelines. So anyway, happy to chat more about that. Co-working spaces, I won't spend a whole lot of time here, but I've now been a part of creating and developing 5 co-working spaces in rural communities, some with as populations as small as 700 people and others 8,000 people. We currently run and operate 2 in Nova Scotia on the South Shore, one in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, one down in Liverpool, and learning lots of stuff about that. And those 3 things, the activation events, the actual physical space, and sort of this virtual incubator kind of fit hand in glove in a lot of ways. So again, I'm happy to dive into that. But this is where I want to spend most of my time with you today, is around sharing where a case study of how we went from one cohort of 8 people to scaling that program across the entire province, but more importantly, the things that we've learned going through that messy experiment. And yeah, some things that surprised us, again, that I wish I learned. So just quickly on, just again for context, the structure of that. So when I say virtual business incubator, it is delivered 100% online with a live facilitator. We work with groups of up to 15 people at a time, and they get together every week for 6 weeks, and unlimited one-on-one coaching in between. And the goal and the purpose, and this is really important, I'll come back to this later, but the goal and the purpose is to help them figure out what is the awesome business model behind this great idea that you have. And can we get you to a point where you could go into a loans officer in a CF office and actually explain what it is you're doing, how it's going to make money, and why it should exist in the world. So it's not necessarily technical training or education. We get into some of that, but the goal is to get them through this process, again, off the sidelines and into the game, so that they can plug into that whole ecosystem. So that's where we focus. So the case study I want to share, again, this is how we went from one cohort of 8 people in one small part of rural Nova Scotia to rolling that program out to work with, to help entrepreneurs start over 100 companies in 60 different communities in a 24-month period. So in every corner of our province, in every region. And where did that journey begin? It was a pretty daunting task at the time, but this was our first test and experiment. So when we first, what's the saying, Darren? Like, if you're not a little bit embarrassed by the first thing you put out in the world, you probably waited too long to launch it. Well, this holds true in this example. So we've come a long way since this tag. But really, the question we were trying to answer was, can we find people in rural Nova Scotia with ideas that are willing to sign up for a 6-week, 100% virtual program? So that's what we did. So we didn't fill the 20 spots. I think only 8 people showed up to the first one. I think we got 6 or 7, the next one we did. But so the results were small, but the impact we were having with those people that did show up was huge. And that got the attention of some folks at the provincial level, and they came to me and said, you know, Andrew, you're doing something really cool. We don't quite understand it or get it, but it sounds like it's working. Is this something that you think you could roll out across the whole province? And I said, I think we can. So at the time they had a funding program. There was a 24-month window. And I went to them with this proposal. I said, based on what we've been doing, I think we can go find 180 people in rural Nova Scotia to go through this program in 20 different communities. And what do you think they said to me? That might be a bit optimistic. I think that was a kind version of what they said, like, and they were kind about it, I have to say, but they kind of gave me that look of like, this guy's good luck finding 180 people in rural Nova Scotia willing to go through a 100% virtual program in a province that has notoriously crappy internet in rural Nova Scotia, right? Like, good luck, bud, right? It's kind of the message I got, but luckily I had some champions kind of in the mix, and they said, you know what, it's probably optimistic, but if there's anybody that's going to go figure this out, it's probably this guy. Like, let's give him a shot. So I'm like, great, challenge accepted. Just watch me. Is kind of the mindset I went into this with. It had no idea how we were actually going to execute on that based on this little experiment that we did. So long story short, over those 24 months, we not only filled those 180 spots, we put 200 people through that process. And those 200 people, again, started over 100 companies in 60 different communities in every corner of our province. So while a lot of people were like surprised by that result and that outcome, I actually wasn't all that surprised by that, right? I was like, I knew that entrepreneurial talent was out there. We've learned a lot of stuff on how to get their attention and get them activated. But I think we're actually just at the tip of the iceberg with this. There were a couple things, though, that did surprise me. That's what I want to share with you. Some things that we went into this process not anticipating and outcomes that we didn't expect, right? And the first one was this. To fill those 200 spots, we actually got 450 applications from dozens and dozens of communities all over the place, people we've never heard of before. So we could have easily doubled or even tripled. And this was with a few emails and a few Facebook posts and a whole ton of grassroots community effort to make this happen. So like, this is interesting to me. We didn't expect that. There was a few other things that really jumped out for me. The first one was this. 80% of the people that went through had never signed up for a business or entrepreneurship program ever before. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that was. We dug into that. But this was the first time that they ever kind of threw their hat in the ring and said, I want to explore this. Despite the fact they had a whole world of resources available to them, some of which were right in their own backyard and community. So that was like really curious and interesting to me. The second thing that jumped out, 75% of them were women, and most of them were women with small kids. 50% had kids under the age of 12. So the fact that we were doing it 100% online, mostly in the evenings, made it a little bit more accessible for those folks. And there were some other reasons that sort of piqued their attention. Finally, about approximately 30% were newcomers to rural Nova Scotia. So had come there, moved from other provinces, other countries, and had ideas from those places that they felt could exist in our communities. So they showed up. So when I saw those results, right, 450 applications, all these things, I'm like, I think we're onto something here. And I believe that the same thing is possible in other places, but I have no proof or evidence of that. So in 2001, it made me wonder, like, can we start to think about how we can help communities in other places outside of Nova Scotia? And the Community Futures Network, like, once again, proved themselves to be innovators and leaders in this space. And I happened to get connected with Susan. Susan, you just want to stand up for a second and say hi to everyone? I sort of put you on the spot like that. Who knows Susan? So everybody, yeah, of course, people know Susan. So Susan works with the association in Manitoba, Saskatchewan. And through the Entrepreneurs with Disabilities Network, we were able to pull in Margie from Alberta and make a pilot of our program happen for entrepreneurs in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And had a ton of fun with that group. Really amazing entrepreneurs showed up. A year later, they're still showing up to our coffee chats. And we had a coffee chat with them yesterday. Just some really, really sort of amazing results along that. So later that year, we got connected with somebody in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, and launched for the first time into the US. Exact same results. And the things that we were seeing, almost to the percentage from what we were seeing in Nova Scotia, held to be true. Numbers were different, smaller, but percentage-wise, it was like, you know, this exists in lots of other places. All right. So some cool things that sort of piqued our interest there. So we've since done several other cohorts in those regions. We've done work in other parts. We've received 650 applications for all those cohorts, 320 entrepreneurs, 200 companies started in 150 different communities throughout Canada and the US. And I believe, again, we're just at the tip of the iceberg with some of this stuff. I think there's a lot more work that we can do. This is something I'm super excited and passionate about. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it here, but again, if you want me to dig into it more, I'm happy to do that. About 2 years ago, we had the honor and privilege, quite frankly, to team up with Unama'ki College. So they're an Indigenous college under Cape Breton University. And at the time, there was an opportunity for us to come together in sort of the spirit of two-eyed seeing to co-design a version of our virtual business incubator specifically for Indigenous entrepreneurs. So they had spent the last 40 years researching what makes the Indigenous entrepreneurship experience different than the Western entrepreneurship experience. And we brought to the table our learning and expertise around how do you deliver this kind of stuff in a 100% virtual environment and make 2-hour Zoom calls not feel like 2-hour Zoom calls and all of that stuff. How do you take these concepts of business model canvas and customer discovery and MVP and all that stuff? How do you translate it in a way that makes it relevant to early stage entrepreneurs? So we came together on that, co-designed a program to run with Indigenous youth in Cape Breton. And later this year, we're actually going to be launching that version of the program in northern Wisconsin with Nicolay College and their partner down there, Great Lakes Intertribal Council, that I'm super excited about. So anyway, I'll leave it there, but if you wanted to dig into it more, structure and framework is relatively the same. The way in which we introduce concepts and how we facilitate the process, extraordinarily different than what we normally do, okay? Okay, so that's what we've been up to. Was any of that helpful, useful, insight? Did that inspire any questions so far?
The initial program that you launched, was there a fee for it or was that a free program?
Great question. Can I come back to it?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. So we'll if I don't bring it up, make sure to remind me of it. What's your name?
Joe.
Joe, thanks, Joe. So it's a great question, and we've done it a bunch of different ways. But maybe what I'll do is like share like these top 10 insights that I've gained going through this work, share a few stories with you around those insights, because I feel like when you put a face and a name to something, it kind of helps us solidify it. And then we can jump into the Q&A. Does that work? Well, how are we for time?
Oh, we're good. More than
We're 20 minutes in? All right, awesome, cool, right on track. Okay, first insight is that innovation is hard to define, and it's even harder to spot, right? I'll say that again. Innovation is hard to define. It's even harder to identify and point out. Who here is from BC? Cool. Anybody here of the Rubbish Boys? So you know what's coming next, right? So who else here has heard of the Rubbish Boys? Show of hands. Right. For those that don't know, who here has ever heard of 1-800-GOT-JUMP? Yeah, exactly, right? So when we think of innovative, technology-enabled, high-growth potential companies, this is not the image that typically gets conjured up, right? But when Brian bought an old truck and painted, junk on the side, and began to innovate around customer experience, guerrilla marketing, right? Logistics and scheduling, and incorporated all kinds of technology into that, grew that to $250 million a year company, thousands of people employed. He's since invested in other technology companies, done all kinds of things, from a $700 truck with junk painted on the side, right? I don't think, they didn't even have enough red paint at the time to finish the side. They had to go back to the shed and finish it with blue paint, and that was good enough, right? That's what got him started. And we've seen this time and time and time again over like several of those entrepreneurs. This is one of them. So this is Lynette. She owns a company called Studio B. And long story short, she got frustrated by the amount of plastic she was having to send to school with her kids in their lunch bags. So she tried to find all kinds of reusable wraps and all kinds of things, and nothing was really working for her. So she came up with her own formulation for all organic beeswax food wraps in her kitchen. And when I first met Lynette, she would be the first to tell you, is like, Andrew, like, I'm not a business person. She wouldn't have called herself an innovator, and she certainly wouldn't have used the label, I'm a technology-enabled, high-growth potential startup founder, right? She certainly would have done that. But guess what? She is every single one of those things. And if the thing that she developed came out of some university somewhere, we'd be probably holding it up as some of the best technology that's been invented on the East Coast, right? So here's the thing. Here's my point. Sometimes our most innovative and entrepreneurial talent are hidden in plain sight. We just got to know how to look for them and what to look for. And sometimes just give them a shot to get off the sidelines and into the game. They do all kinds of extraordinary things. All right, so that was the first one. Oops, where am I here? Cool. Second one is about positioning. All right. So how you position things in the market matters a lot. So the language that you use, the messaging around that language, and quite frankly, like the invitation you put out into the world will dictate the kind of people that show up. So today, I'm the same guy as I was when I was working in economic development, right? Same heart, same amount of passion, same curiosity around this stuff. But when I started a different company, positioned differently in the market, different messaging, different strategy, a whole other audience of people start showing up to my stuff, right? How you put that invitation into the world makes a huge difference. Remember I said like 80% of folks that signed up for the program never plugged into anything before? Well, we had to ask why, right? It's like, what was it about what you saw or what you heard, what we put in front of you that made you jump into this thing when you had all kinds of other alternatives, other things that you could have done, quality stuff, right? Quality programming. And the feedback that we got consistently was, while there's a bunch of stuff that's available, and some of it is even accessible, not all of it felt approachable to me, despite our best efforts as economic developers. It was an approachability challenge, right? Because they felt like all of that awesome stuff was for somebody that wasn't them. They didn't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. They didn't think what they were working on, whether it's a business, idea for a new startup or an idea to expand an existing business. They didn't feel like that was a valid or viable thing, a legit business. So all of those things were for somebody that's not me. So I'm just going to try to figure it out. Totally not true, by the way. They deserve to be in all of that stuff, but it didn't feel approachable. And that's their language. That's not mine. That's those, like that word came up dozens and dozens of times as we asked that question. The challenge is not just about getting clever with messaging and all that stuff. It has to be consistent and approachable all the way through. So if they see the approachable poster and sign up for the program, but the application process and how they get onboarded doesn't also feel like people start to leave, they kick out, right? It has to be consistent all the way through. Really, really hard for one organization to do all of that with everything that we're doing. Again, happy to dive into that. The third thing was channels. So the channels that you use to deliver that message, again, have a huge impact in terms of who shows up, right? So the story I want to share with you around this is Mary. So meet Mary, sort of. So this isn't a picture of Mary. I don't have a picture. I've never actually met Mary. I only talked to her on the phone. So I had to go find a picture of what I think Mary might look like. And the story with Mary goes like this. So we were running a cohort or a session of our virtual incubator at Cape Breton. And over like a 48-hour period, we got 12 applications from Meat Cove, Cape Breton. Who here knows where Meat Cove is? Right? Have you ever been to Meat Cove?
No.
Oh, okay. Who's been to Meat Cove? You have. Oh, wait. Have you tried to make a cell phone call from Meat Cove? No, you can't, right? So good luck getting a cell signal up there, no less high-speed internet to take a virtual incubator program. Like, how do we just get 12 applications from a community of like, what, 500 people out there, 300 maybe? 200? Oh, okay, so not many people in Meat Cove. And we got 12 applications from this one little spot. Like, what the hell is this all about? So anyway, we had to ask, right? So we went out and called them up and said, great, you just apply for this thing, awesome. How did you hear about it? And they were like, oh, I got Mary's email. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I called the next person. How did you hear about it? Oh, it was in Mary's email. I'm like, okay. Third person, I'm like, how did you hear about it? Oh, there's a bunch of us that are on Mary's list. I'm like, who the heck is Mary? And what is this email? So come to find out, long story short, Mary actually lives in Bedeck, Nova Scotia. It's part of that region. She's, at the time, was 73 years old, a volunteer with her local church auxiliary. She would spend her days going around all the bulletin boards in town, walking around town, making note of stuff. All the cool stuff that was happening in the community, upcoming events, she would put that in a weekly email and send that out to everybody in the community, right? So you came to town, you weren't on Mary's email, like, you didn't know what was going on. Everybody got on Mary's email. I don't know how many people she had on that list, thousands of people in that region. And somehow our stuff landed on Mary's radar and she shared it out with that group. Resulted in 12 applications from a community of a couple hundred people. I think we accepted 8 of them into the process. 6 of them started businesses. A couple dozen people working in a community of that size.
Wow.
Huge impact from a young lady in Bedeck that didn't hold a title or a position in our ecosystem, but held the trust and attention of the people we were trying to communicate with. And I can bet you there's a Mary in every single town and region across this country. You just got to go find them. And when I was in my economic development days, I didn't think to reach out to the church auxiliary thinking they would have a 1,000-person email list, right? So that's just one example that it happens in like every place that we go looking for the merits. And with help with the community partners, we find them often. And when we do, they're awesome. Thanks, Mary. The other big insight, and this was something that was challenging for me in our economic development days and why I decided to create Mashup Lab the way that I did. But you have to get crystal clear when you're doing this stuff on the outcome that you're trying to achieve, right? And what I mean by that, I'll explain that as telling the story of Lucas. So Lucas was in our first cohort in northern Wisconsin. He was a gym teacher at the local school. So Wisconsin's like in the middle of America, right? Not on the coast, don't have access to really great seafood, certainly don't have access to seafood that is direct from source, right? Direct from the fisherman. So he, during his summers, went to Bristol Bay, Alaska, and he would fish on the salmon boats out there. Beautiful place. You should see some of the pictures this guy has. And they send the catch to Seattle, and they process it there, and they send it back to their customers in that package. So he would bring some of that stuff back with him to Wisconsin, which is like giving it out for Christmas gifts and that kind of stuff to his friends and his buddies. And he thought there was something more to do there. But he said, listen, he applied for the program, we got on a call. I said, you know, what is it you want to achieve? He's like, I don't want to go through a training workshop on the fundamentals of business. I don't want to go through like a whole 3-month program thing. I could take the entrepreneurship course at the college. I don't want any of that. I just want somebody to help me figure out how I turn this into my full-time gig so I can quit my job. That's it. Right. So I said the same thing to Lucas. I say to every entrepreneur that comes through. I'm like, my goal isn't to educate you around these things or to train you on how to use a business model canvas and all that stuff. We'll do some of that in the process. But my goal is to help you figure out how to build an awesome company around this idea that you have. And that awesome company could be a company that makes you an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a year, and your family goes on a nice vacation, and that's great. Or it could be something that your full-time gig and hire your neighbors and you do some other stuff. Any of those things are just as awesome in my mind. So he was like, great, I'm in. And long story short, he's since figured out how to get a bunch of salmon into Wisconsin. His big problem now is cold storage. They don't have like cold storage facilities, so he pre-sells everything before he goes to Alaska. And people come to him other times of the year like, hey, you got any more of that salmon? He's like, I don't fish again until July, so good luck. So he's got to figure that part out. But the biggest compliment he gave us was, you know what? When I first got into this, I'm like, what the heck are these guys from rural Nova Scotia going to be able to do to help me in the middle of Wisconsin figure out how to get this business idea off the ground? He's like, you know what? It feels like you could be just down the road. Like I forget that you're on the other side of the country, you know, helping me with this stuff. The technology for him just like kind of fell to the background. All right, couple more we'll run through quick and then we'll open it up for questions. We heard this yesterday, and me and Sebastian didn't plan this out, but you know, start before it's perfect. So we had a problem around broadband internet in rural places. We had all kinds of challenges figuring out how to get the attention of people that don't typically pay attention to this stuff. We didn't have the answers to all those questions, but we started anyway. We figured it out as we go, right? And who saw this card on the table yesterday, right? You don't have to have all the answers to start. And I found that in my economic development days, there was so much process and checks and balances legitimately there, but sometimes it slowed us down from doing experiments that don't always work out, right? So sometimes you try some stuff, it doesn't work. You don't maximize the impact you're trying to have, but you sometimes maximize your learning around how to have the big impact. And that was the first sort of 2 years that we were doing this. It was, we figured out all of those answers as we met and figured out how to make the impact of 300 plus entrepreneurs starting 200 companies and 150 communities, right? We didn't know that 4 years ago. This is probably one of the biggest insights. I'm still not quite, like this is a bit of a pet project of mine. Sometimes the biggest impact we have going through this process is hard to measure. It's hard to know what the ripple effects are, but I can tell you one thing, it is impossible to ignore. So the story I'll share with you around this is Jan. So Jan is an Indigenous entrepreneur from Pictou County. And she's always been a storyteller and fascinated with stories. So as a kid, she would go around with like her little recorder, like interviewing her brothers and sisters and parents and aunties and uncles and all that stuff. And when I first met Jan, she, as a gift for some of her family, she would go and interview your favorite aunts and capture the story of their life and ask them questions in their own words. And then she would take that and produce this beautifully curated personal podcast of that person's life. Just an amazing, amazing gift. And when I talked to Jan, she's like, "Oh, I just do that as a hobby. Like nobody would pay for anything like that." And I almost looked exactly like that. Are you kidding me? Nobody would pay. Like that is a beautiful, beautiful product. So long story short, she ended up going through the program, realized there was an absolutely viable, scalable company there. She, over the course of COVID, actually chose not to pursue the business, other priorities in life, and she made the choice not to go ahead with it at the end of the day. I think she did it for a while and then decided to push the pause button. Here's the thing. Her confidence and courage around calling herself an entrepreneur, thinking what she was working on as a business, went through the roof in those 6 weeks. And her 7-year-old son would often be on the calls with us. So that's one thing that we do, just completely normalize the kids being around. And we've had mothers that need to breastfeed newborns and they just shut their camera off and do their thing. We just normalize all of that. What's the impact of that 7-year-old that sees their mom going through an entrepreneurship program, right? What's now in his mind of what's in the realm of possibility from a rural place? That's the impact, super hard to measure, right? Impossible to ignore. And I've been trying to find some academic institution to help me try to figure out how to measure this. I'm sure they're out there. We're not researchers and academics, but I know the impact is there. Confidence and courage is also a big impact. Hard to measure. Couple more. This is kind of gets to your question. Currency comes in lots of different forms, right? So when we were first doing this, people said, "Oh, free program, nobody's going to sign up." They got to have some skin in the game, right? So paying $100 or $20 or whatever the amount is that we charge is only one form of currency. So what I say to folks is like, even though there isn't a financial commitment to go through this, it's been paid for, it's sponsored, it's free for you as an entrepreneur. There's a significant time commitment that's invested. There's also a significant social commitment that's invested. I'm going to now talk about this idea I have with 14 other people on this call, and now I got to do something with it. I'm committing to moving it forward, right? Internalizing that is sometimes a bigger cost to them, a bigger currency than the $100 that we might be able to determine for. And that ends up being a huge barrier to getting some of those people off the sidelines into the game. So that's why I wanted to wait to answer your question. Did that cover it? Yeah, okay. If it didn't, feel free to ask it again. The other big thing was diversity. And the more diversity at this stage of that messy part of the entrepreneurial journey, the better. And I don't mean diversity in sort of our traditional context of gender and ethnicity, culture and demographics and all that stuff. That is included, but also diversity of ideas. So the thing that jumps out for me here, again, we were running a cohort, and this one was in Nova Scotia. And on the same call, we had an 18-year-old high school student that was working on the online arts magazine to showcase up-and-coming talent in her community. On the same call as a 73-year-old opera singer that was trying to figure out how to reinvent how to get opera singing gigs. On the same call as a 55-year-old woman that just retired from a corporate career, moved back to a rural town and wanted to upcycle clothing. So take old used clothing and turn it into all sorts of new products and hire 20 sewers in her community on the same call. there's an interesting conversation that happens when you get that kind of diversity of not only people, not only life experience, not only ideas. You just start layering that on top of each other, and the peer learning that happens in a group like that. That's where the magic comes. So the more diversity, the better. This is something I think is really important. The stories we share matter a lot. So the things we hold up and celebrate as examples of success can oftentimes dictate who shows up to our invitation, right? So again, we go back to the example of Brian and Rubbish Boys. We don't necessarily hold that up as an innovative company, right? But by doing those things and holding up examples of people that tried and failed, people that went through the 6-week program and it wasn't the right time then, but they started a business a year from now. Those kinds of stories that we share are just as successful in my mind at getting that untapped talent off the sidelines and into the game, right? We often tell the stories of people that have started businesses, expanding, hiring people. That's awesome too. But we forget a whole other set of stories that oftentimes leaves a lot of people on the sidelines. Okay, last thing I'm going to share with you is this. In this work, in my economic development days, there was a lot of focus around sort of the final end of that entrepreneurial journey, right? Finding those scalable businesses that can come in, hire lots of people in our community, do things globally, all that stuff, which is awesome. We also need to think about not just scaling up, but finding companies that can scale deep. And what I mean by that is, like, how do we find companies that set deep roots in our community, even though they may not be as scalable sometimes. But every once in a while, you find somebody that does both. Last story I'll share. So this is Sean in the back here. Sean's a technology guy, and he's from the UK. Started a company over there with two founders that he would call the entrepreneur and the business guy. He calls himself the technology guy. And he moved to Nova Scotia, and the other two founders were there, 50, 60 people working for them in London, great company. And he started working by himself in my co-working space, came into some of our activation events, and came to me one day and said, listen, I have an idea for some technology that I think we can develop here in Canada that would help the video game developers in London make better video games faster to help us scale the company more quickly. And he's like, I don't know how to pitch that to my business partners for them to give me the green light to invest money and go and build this division in our company. So we pulled a bunch of stuff out of the virtual business incubator, got him through it. Long story short, he made that pitch to his partners. They gave him the green light. He used my co-working space to build his team and start to find the right people to build the technology that he was looking to build. Long story short, 2 years ago, they sold to the largest mobile video game company in the world for $350 million US. Massive impact. The best part of this story in my mind is not the exit. It's the fact that we now have 12, 15 young professionals in a town of 700 people making $70, $80, $90,000 a year, going to all the coffee shops, all the nice restaurants, all that stuff, putting their kids in our school because this opportunity exists. We figured out how to take somebody that didn't think of himself as an entrepreneur to pitch an idea to make something really cool happen. We don't just have to think about scale up, we also have to think about where can we find people that can scale deep. Was that helpful? Awesome. Cool. So we're growing and we feel like the things that we're learning can be helpful in lots of other places. So we're currently actually looking for 20 other regions and communities to run a pilot of this program to see if we can replicate some of the results there in both Canada and the US. So for us, again, it's really important to have those community partners involved. Again, we never launch Master Lab into a region without a community partner there that says, I've heard what you had to say. I think it can be helpful and useful to the things that we're trying to do here in our community. So for us, they exist in a collaborative environment, right? They have people in their region that they play nice in the sandbox with. They're forward thinking around those things. They understand that there's probably some things that we've learned that can be helpful, give them a head start. They see the kind of potential that we see in their community, right? And they value all types of entrepreneurship, everything from that stay-at-home mom that makes an extra $3,000 a year to that $350 million startup and everything in between. And they share our sense of urgency to get at this work. We have to start before it's perfect. And we feel like the things that we're learning can help some communities get started on amplifying what happens in that part of the entrepreneurial journey. Right. So thanks for the time and the attention. As a sign of our gratitude for you guys choosing to come to this session, like I said, we're giving away $50,000 in free programming to at least 10 communities. So this is a sort of light version of our virtual business incubator that we've been running. It's called the Idea Challenge. We pulled some components of our virtual incubator out, and it's more of like a do it on your own time, DIY sort of version of the program where you're given a challenge every day for a week to work through some things, and you can do that whenever you choose. 100% online, do it on your own time, 7 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night. You get 24 hours to get that challenge done. We typically charge $500 a person to go through that. So we're going to open up 10 spots to folks in your community, your region, however you define that, to go through that program for free. So the QR code here doesn't necessarily work all that great. So the QR code that's on your desk on the back of my business card, if you have one of those, it should work there. If it doesn't work, come find us, get us a business card, we'll email to you so you can register your company, and then we'll follow up with you after the conference to explain all the details and logistics around how to get in on that. Okay. Would that be helpful for some folks? Awesome. Okay. That's everything that I have. Let's open up for some questions. Thanks again for your attention, everybody.